So the Gemara starts on Dalet Amud Aleph, the first line. V'halo damya hayitzia lahayitzia. How can you compare when a Amma Ivria leaves her master and goes free to a girl who's leaving her father's rishus when she gets engaged, when he accepts Kiddushin on her behalf? Hasam nafke mishus adon lagamri v'hacha akati mesira lechupa, because when she leaves her master, she's completely out of her master's rishus. However, at this time, just because her father accepted Kiddushin, she doesn't leave her father's home completely, because she is still needs chuppah. And only once she does chuppah does she leave her father's house and enter her husband's house. So the Gemara answers, however, in regard to the nullification of Nidarim, she has left her father's rishus. Tetnan, because we learned in the Mishnah and Nidarim. And Ksuvos also Nara Marasa, a Nara, so a 12-year-old girl who is engaged, who her father accepted Kiddushin on her behalf. Avia Ubaila Mafira Nidareha. Her husband and father both nullify her nidarim, her vows. So because her father has lost his control, and I don't mean that in a controlling way, but over her nidarim, so therefore we can make a similarity between leaving her father's rishus and leaving her master's rishus if she was a amahivriya, a servant. The hive yatzachinam lahach asa. So v'yatzachinam, is that telling us that ein kesef ladon zav yesh kesef ladon acher, that her master doesn't have money when she leaves, but her father does get money when she leaves? Is this what this drasha is teaching us? We needed to learn out the drasha from the following brisa. The Tanya, because we learned in the brisa, and she will go free. These are the days of bagros. Ein kesef elu me naros, and ein kesef is the days of Nara. So again, remember, Nara is when she's 12 years old and shows the physical signs of puberty. That she's a Nara, and she's a Nara for 6 months, and then she becomes a Bogeres. So we need a pasuk to tell us that she goes free in Bagros, and we need a pasuk to tell us that she goes free in Naras. We're later on this Amud, the Gemara is going to say, why do you need both? Because if she goes free when she's a Nara, she's already free when she becomes a Bogeres. So the Gemara will talk about that towards the bottom of this Amud. So because we're using Ein Kesef for Eliu Meinaros, it's not available for the drasha of that the master doesn't have money, but the father does get money when she's leaving his rishus through Kiddushin. Amravina imkain lemakra Ein Kesef. So my Ein Kesef ladon yesh kesef ladon acher. U'may nihu av. So Ravina says that the spelling of the word Ein doesn't have to be spelled Aleph Yud Nun. It could be spelled Aleph Nun. The fact that it's spelled Aleph Yud Nun, so the Aleph Nun would tell us that the Nara goes free from being an Amivriya. And the extra Yud in the word Ein, Aleph Yud Nun, tells us that Ein Kesef Ladon Zav Yesh Kesef Ladon Acher. That the father, when she leaves her father's rishus, the father could get money when he accepts Kiddushin on her behalf. Then the Gemara says, and we might do Darshina and Hachi, how do we know that we can make a drasha from the word Ein with a Yud versus without a Yud? The Tanya, because we learned in the Brisa, V'zera Ein la. Ein li elazara. Zera zarminayin, Tamalamer zera Ein la, Ayin la. So the halacha is that if people in a Kohen's household are allowed to eat truma, we'll see that an Eved Ivri or an Am Ivri are not allowed to, because he doesn't own them, but his family, a non-Jewish Eved that he owns, or non-Jewish Shivcha, are allowed to eat. So if he had a daughter, this Kohen had a daughter, so she grew up eating truma, and then she got married to a non-Kohen, so she wasn't allowed to eat truma, and then she died without any children, she's allowed to eat truma again because she returns to her father's house because she has no children. But the Yibum situation is whether there was chalitza or whether there were no brothers. That's a separate discussion, a separate issue. So Vizera Ainlov, she has no descendants. Ainli Elazara. That's if she doesn't have any children. Zera Zarminayin. How do we know? Let's say she had a son or a daughter. That son or daughter died, but before they died, they had a kid. So she has a grandchild now, and now this lady is widowed, and she has no living children, but she has a living grandchild. Is she allowed to eat truma back in her father's house, and her father's a Kohen? Tamalomer Zera Ainla, Ayinla. We have to investigate. So if there's children from any way, descendants from any way, she is not allowed to eat truma. The Ainli El Zera kosher, and this is not limited to having kosher progeny. Is there a pasal minayin? How do we know if she has non-kosher progeny that also she is not allowed to eat truma? So Rashi says kagon mamzer. So let's say she was married to a kosher person. So they had a kid, and somehow the kid committed adultery or whatever, and they'd had a kid who was a mamzer, or case man says whatever. So her living grandchild is a mamzer or mamzeres. How do you know also? That also disqualifies her from eating truma when she's widowed and goes back to her father's house. Talmud Lomer Zera Ein La Ayin La. She doesn't have children, so Ein La, not just that she doesn't have, but Ayin La. You have to investigate and search to make sure that she doesn't have any progeny at all, kosher or apostle. So the Gemara asks, "V'hafkise lezera zara zera v'hafkise lezera zara." You already used the pasuk of Ein La to learn out that even if she has grandchildren, that disqualifies her from eating truma. So how can you use the same drasha to say that even if she has non-kosher children? So the Gemara says, "Zera zera lo itzrich kra debnei banim harehin kevanim." She doesn't. We don't need a pasuk to tell us that if she has grandchildren living, she's not allowed to eat truma, because there's a principle that grandchildren are like children. So just like if she would have children, she wouldn't be allowed to have eat truma when she would get widowed. If she has grandchildren, she wouldn't be allowed to eat truma either. So we only need the pasuk of Ein La to tell us that even if she has puzzle descendants. So the Gemara asks, Ki Yitzrakrel Lazera Puzzle. So we only need the pasuk to tell us that if she has puzzle kids, grandchildren, for example, a mamzer, or possibly at this line of the Gemara, Lazera Puzzle might even include children. I'm not sure. It would for sure include a puzzle grandchild, but maybe even or great grandchild, but maybe even a child. But how does the Tana know that you can make a drasha? Ein la. How do you make a drasha from Ein? She doesn't have children, that it means ayin la. Riksiv, because we could have said a pasuk like the following psukim. Me'ain Bilam. Bilam, we usually translate it, refuses to come to with us. That when Bilam refused to go with the first messengers of Balak, in the case of Chalitza, my Yavam refuses to do Yibum with me, so I'm doing Chalitza. So those words, Me'ain, doesn't have the word Yud, and this one does have a Yud, Shmami Dra, L'Drasha Huda Asa. So we learn that we can make a drasha from the word Ain having a Yud, because it could have been written without a Yud. Now, according to this Gemara, I don't know about Pashtus Dekra, but you could say that Me'ain Bilam, the Pashtus Dekra, Me'ain means refuse. It's not the same exact word as Ain. Rashi says, at least for this drasha, that the word Me'ain means Bilam is not. Me'ain Yavami, my Yavam is not. So you could interpret, Rashi doesn't say it explicitly, so maybe he doesn't mean it this way, that instead of using the word Ain, it could, the word Aleph Yud Nun, it uses the word Mem Aleph Nun. But honestly, if you'd say that, then this drasha wouldn't make sense, because in this pasuk of Zera Ein La, it's just Aleph Yud Nun. There's no Mem in it. So I'm just saying that Pashtus Akra, I would personally think that Me'ain is a different word than Ain. Ain is not. Me'ain is refuse. But Rashi says that Me'ain Me'ein bilam, me'ein rav, is that there is no bilam for us. There is no yavam for me. So therefore, when the pasuk does have the word yud in the word ein, it's for drasha. Even though these two examples aren't the word ein by itself, aleph nun, it's mem aleph nun. So the fact that it says ein with a yud, we can make a drasha from it. Okay, now the Gemara says, "Ve'itzrach lemichtav kiddusha levia, ve'itzrach lemichtav masideh levia." We need one drasha to include that. What if her father accepts Kiddushin for marriage on her behalf? He gets to keep the Kiddushin. But we also need a drasha that if she has a job, the father gets the money from her salary also. We only would have had a pasuk that when her father accepts Kiddushin on her behalf, he gets to keep them. I would say because she didn't work for them, so he gets to keep it. But I would say if I would only know that the father keeps the Kiddushin, I would say she would get to keep her own wages from when she works, because she worked for it, she gets to keep it. Kiddushin, she didn't have to work for it. Just someone came and says to her father, I want to marry your daughter, here's Kiddushin money. Because she didn't work for it, her father gets to keep it, she doesn't get to keep it. So therefore we need both psukim. And if we would have had a pasuk that says that her wages that she makes goes to her father, I would say that only that goes to her father to come as sanza mine, because he has a requirement a responsibility to feed her. So because he has to feed her, if she's bringing in some money, he can use that money or not use that money for the expenses that he has in room and board for her. Kiddushin de me'alma, even though it's his kid. Kiddusha de me'alma kasi la ema dida havu, but Kiddushin come from an outside source. It's not from her inherent working. So maybe the father shouldn't have any, who shouldn't be able to keep it. Ema dida havu, I would say she gets to keep her own Kiddushin tzricha. So therefore we need both psukim to tell us that her wages that she makes from working stays with her, and that with her father, and that also if her father accepts Kiddushin on her behalf, he gets to keep it. 2 dots in the middle of Dalet Aleph. Gufa v'yatzachina eli mei bagros and kesav eli mei naros. So the pasuk says at the end of an ama ivriya v'yatzachina, she goes free. Ein kesav, there's no money. Let me just see this pasuk for a second. If these 3 things aren't done to her, if she goes free from, meaning if the master didn't do yud, which yud is he can convert the ama into being a wife, then if she goes free and no money. So the drasha is she goes free. These are the days of bagros. So if she comes a bagera, she goes free. If she becomes a nara, she also goes free. So the question Gemara asked, we mentioned this above, let the Torah just say when she reaches the state of naros, she goes free, and we don't need a pasuk to tell us about bagros, because before she's 12 and a half, she had to be 12. So Amar Rabba this one teaches about the other one, similar to a toshav and sacher. So the time, because we weren't in a brayso, toshav zakino kino olam, sacher zakino kino and shanim. So we're talking about, we mentioned a few minutes ago that a member of a Kohen's household could eat truma. However, a toshav and sacher are not allowed to eat it. So what's a toshav? What's a sacher? So toshav, which means like a resident. This is an Eved Ivri who had his ear, a pole poked in his ear because he didn't want to leave after his 6 years, and he's there through Yovel. So he's not allowed to eat truma. And a sacher, a rented, zek kinoi kinun shanim. That's someone who's in his first 6 years of being an Eved Ivri. So neither of them are allowed to eat truma. So the Gemara asks, Yomer toshav lo yomer sacher, and Yomer kanu kinu lama ino ochel kanu kinu shanim lo kol shekain. So why didn't the pasuk just say toshav, a resident, and it wouldn't have to say the word sacher? And I would say that if a nirtza, the Eved who has to work there forever, at least till Yova, beyond the 6 years, he doesn't eat truma. Someone who's working for only a slave for only a servant for 6 years doesn't eat truma either, certainly. So the Gemara says, Ilukain, if that we only would have had the word toshav written, Hayisi Omer toshav zakinu kinun shanim. I would say that toshav only refers to an Eved Ivri in his first 6 years of being a servant. Avokone kinu olam ochel. But if someone with an Eved Ivri became a nirtza, and he had he refused to, he didn't want to leave, and he had the hole poked in his ear by the Beis Din, I would say that he would be that Eved Ivri would be allowed to eat truma. So we need the word sacher and toshav in the pasuk to teach us that a toshav is someone who is more of a servant than a sacher. The sacher, the word the regular lashon would imply a rental, and toshav is more of a resident. So who's a toshav? He's living in the house for a very long time because he didn't want to. He 6 years was enough. He wanted to stay even longer than 6 years. So we need both, because if we only had one, we wouldn't make the drasha appropriately. That even though he's a slave forever, which we'll learn later on in the parak, it only means till Yova, but he's a slave for a servant for much longer than 6 years, he does not eat truma either. So if we only would have said aviyat zachinam, we wouldn't know bagros and naros. We might learn naros only, we might learn bagros only, but we need both so that we'll have a drasha for naros and bagros, because otherwise we will only have a drasha for one. And we'll see in a few minutes why we need both. Amalei Abaye midami. Abaye said, is it similar? Hasam trei gufei ninu hacha. Is it comparable? Because there, by a toshav and a sacher, you could have both of those in your household at the same time. You could have an Eved Ivri who's working for 6 years. You could have an Eved Ivri who's beyond his 6 years. It could be different people. Because the pasuk could have said toshav nirtza lo yochal. The nirtza, the resident with the hole in his ear can't eat. And then if it would have said the word sacher, I would say that it's a milsa d'asa b'kal v'chomer. We can learn out of kal v'chomer that if the one with the hole in his ear doesn't eat and he's in your household for a longer period, the one who's in your household for a shorter period certainly doesn't eat truma. Umilsa d'asa b'kal v'chomer tarch b'kasav lakra. And something which we could learn in the Torah, in kal v'chomer, nevertheless, the Torah goes out of its way to give extra words to include that, so we don't have to learn it from a limud. The Torah is willing to spend a few extra words to tell us something that otherwise we would know. But here it's one girl. First she reaches the state of naros. Then 6 months later she reaches the state of bagros. Once she reached the state of naros, she already goes free. So why do we need a pasuk to tell us that the bogeres goes free? Abaye is telling us that this teaches us about a bogeres islandess. So an islandess is a girl who never brings signs of physical maturity. So at 12 and 13 and 14 and 15 and 16, etc., she doesn't have any signs of naros, so she never reaches a state of naros. Now the halacha is that a young woman like that who never reaches a state of naros, when she reaches age 20, she becomes a bogeres, even though she never reached a state of naros. So if a girl never reached naros, when she reaches a bagros, she would go free. So that's why we need a pasuk for both. That's how Rabbi answers. I might think that only a naros, showing the physical signs of maturity, is what makes her go free from her master, but bagros doesn't. So therefore we need a drasha to tell us that a girl who never displays the signs of naros still goes free. Maskefla Marbar Ravashi asked against this answer of Abaye. V'lav kal v'chomer, who isn't it a kal v'chomer? Masamanim shein motzin reshus adon, the signs of physical maturity that do not leave her out of her father's reshus, because she stays in her father's reshus even when she's a nara until she's a bogeres. He can still marry her off when she's a nara, but naros is enough to take her out of her master's reshus if she was an ama ivriya. Bagros shemotzim reshus ava eno din shemotzim reshus adon. but the state of Bagros 6 months after she was an Ara, that does take her out of her father's rishus. It certainly should take her out of her master's rishus. So Ma'abar Rashi tells us that this is teaching you that you could sell a bogeres to an Amma ab initio from the very beginning. I might think that only a girl who will develop and will display the signs of Naras will be able to be sold as an Amma Ivriya, and if she doesn't, she won't be able to be sold as an Amma Ivriya. So this pasuk, Elia May Bagros, teaches us that Kamash Malan, that she could be sold via Zachinam, Elia May Bagros. So Tosa has an obvious question. We don't know if she's an islandess until she's 12 and 13, until she's 19 and a half or whatever, and still doesn't bring the signs of Naras. So how do you know? How could you know? There's no way of knowing she's an islandess beforehand. So what's Ma'abar Rashi telling us? So Tosos answers that when it ends up that she, if not for this drasha, it would end up that if she became never showed Simone Naras and then became 20 years old, and we say she's a Bogeres, the master would have to return. The father would have to return the money with which the master had paid for her, and the master would have to return to the father any the value of any of the work that she did over the years. And also Tosfos points out, if he did yud with her, the yud wouldn't have taken effect because she wasn't an Amma. If she wasn't an Amma to begin with, yud couldn't take effect. So if she would have been yud, that would be nullified or canceled. So now on Dalet Amud Aleph, top line, Ulamar Bar Rav Ashi, the Amar V'lav Kavachomer Hu, Amrina Milsa Da'asav Kavachomer Tarch V'kasav Lakra. So we just said a few lines up from the bottom of Dalet Amud Aleph, what about 9 lines up, that's something that we could learn a Kavachomer. The pasuk is going to explicitly say it anyway. Ma'abar Rav Ashi is arguing on that because he has a Kavachomer, so therefore he learns a different drasha out of it. So what does he do with that principle that even though even though we could have learned something with the Kavachomer, the Torah will explicitly mention it anyway? He would learn that principle is limited to Hani Mili Hecha Deleka Lishnuye. Well, Hecha Deika Lishnuye Mishaninan. That's only if you couldn't learn it out. But here, because we're able to make drashas from it, we do make a drasha. So if there's no drasha to make, we'll just say the Torah, even though we could have learned a Kavachomer, the Torah mentions it anyway. But here we learned it from a Kavachomer because we'll have a different drasha to learn from that pasuk of Ein Kasef Elimei Bagros. Okay, 2 dots, 5th line of Dalam Aleph. V'tana Ma'isi Lemehacha, but a Tana learned it from here. And how do we know that Kasef Kiddushin works? So on Daf Beis, we learned that there's Exer Shava of Kicha Mistei Ephraim. That just like you could spend money to buy a field, you could spend money to use money to acquire a wife, because both of them have the word Yikach. But a Brisa has another limud in Parshas Ki Seitze, I think. Is it this week's Parsha? When a man will take a woman and beboil her, and if she does not find favor in his eyes because he found an ervas davar, and he'll give her a get. So ein kicha ela bekasef. So the word yikach, kicha refers to buying with money. And similarly, we learned from Avram buying the Marsa Machpelah, gracious help Gimel. Yeah, of buying the field. So the Gemara says, "Well, din who isn't a kavachomer? Ma ama ivri yasheinu neknos b'via neknos b'kasef." So again, I'm not sure that this is a different limud that we said at the beginning. Kicha mistei Ephraim. This might be the same limud, and it's interesting because this, and also we're going to see. We saw So on Hayamad Aleph, about 15 lines from the top, there's a drush of a kasav labeksiva miskereshes, venim miskereshes bekasav. That a woman that shtar may not work for Kiddushin. We might think that a shtar works for Gerushin, but not for Kiddushin. But we saw also on Daf Beis, I think it was, her Gimel and Aleph, of Sefer Kores ve'ein davar acher Kores. So it's a slightly different drasha. Is it the same drasha as the one on Hamid Alf? So here also is this brisa here of Kiikach is similar to Avram buying Mars Machpela, even though it doesn't say Kicha Mistei Efron. And earlier, it seems that for whatever reason in the Gemara in the beginning of Kiddushin here, it's using the same drashos but couching them in slightly different words. So the source that a woman could be married with, could be acquired with money, is it says Kikach Isha, and we know that Kicha, Avraham bought the field from Ephron with money. So the Gemara asks, Valo din, who isn't it a Kavachomer? Uma Amar Ivriya she'ino niknas b'via niknas b'kasef. An Amar Ivriya who is not acquired through biak, is acquired through money. Zusha niknas b'via eno din she'tikna b'kasef. A woman who is acquired through bia should certainly be acquirable through money. So the Gemara rejects it. Says no, Yavama tochich niknas b'via eno niknas b'kasef, because to do yibum, money doesn't work for yibum, as we said on Daf Beis and Aleph. And only Bia works. So we see that there are things that Bia works for, Kesef doesn't work for. But then the Gemara says, Maili Yavama Shekin Enikdas Bishtar, Tomer Bezusha Nikdas Bishtar, but Yavama isn't acquired with Shtar either. But for Kiddushin, she could be acquired in a Shtar either. So therefore, Bia and Shtar, let her also from so it's not a Kavachomer, but it's a Mematzinu. It's a common denominator from two other halachos, from Yavama and Amar Ivriya. We should learn that a woman can have Kiddushin through money. Hamalamar ki kachish. When a man will take a woman and he takes it through using money. So the Gemara says, Halamali Kra, why do you need the pasuk? We just made a good mematzinu, a good limud. So we don't need the drush of kikach anymore. So the Gemara says, Lamali Kra Ha'asyala, why do we need the pasuk of kikach? We just learned it out as a mematzinu. So Amar Rabashi says, Mishum deikla meimar meikar dedina pircha. From the very beginning, the limud was already slugged up. Where did we try to learn the Kiddushin from Amma Ivriya? We said just like if Amma Ivriya is not acquired through Bia, is acquired through money, a wife who's acquired through Bia could be acquired through money. We say, no, you can't learn it out from Amma Ivriya, because Amma Ivriya could go free with Kasef, meaning if people would raise money on her behalf to free her and pay the master, she would go free. A woman can never go free through Kasef. Therefore, we need the drasha of kikach ish, and kicha is money. We need a drasha of v'yatzachinam, that we learn that the father gets to keep the money for Kiddushin, and the itzrach lemet of ki kachish, and we need also the pasuk of ki kachish. So we need a pasuk that a minor girl can be married off by her father with money, and we also know that a woman who is a gedola can also be married off by accepting Kiddushin, money Kiddushin on her own behalf. The kasarachmana ki kachavamina Kiddushin diavla baldi dahavu. I might think that any Kiddushin that a man gives to betroth a woman go to the woman. Therefore, we need a pasuk v'yatzachinam to tell us that if she was a minor and her father acquired, or a nara, and her father accepted Kiddushin on her behalf, she does not get to keep that Kiddushin. And if we wouldn't have known a pasuk for an adult woman, we only known that the that the katana or nara that the father marries off, if we only know that he gets to keep the money, I might think that only the kesef kiddushin works when it goes to the father. When she gave it to him, the kidashto, and sanctified him, have a kiddushin. That would be kiddushin. So Rashi says if she would give him money and say, "Hiskade shli, you will be sanctified to me with this money." So therefore, kasrachmana ki yikach below ki sikach. We need the pasuk of ki yikach, that the man isn't taking, and not ki sikach when the woman, or when a woman takes a man. So she's not allowed to marry a husband. So I think I mentioned on Dav Beis about the double ring ceremonies. One of the possible problems with that is that it looks like kisikach. So if we only known in Kesef, we wouldn't have a source to tell us that a woman could not be Mekadesh a man. So therefore, we need Kiyikach to tell us that the Kiddushin takes place by the man taking the woman and not the woman taking the man. 2 dots. Ubala, about 10 lines up from the bottom. So Kikach ish isha ubala, when a man will take a woman and lay with her. Bala. Malamish Nixbabia, this teaches us that a woman is acquired with bia. That's a one way, and a second way to do kiddushin, or kesef shtar bia. Velo dinhu, isn't it a kavachomer? Ma yavama shenu nikras bekesef nixbab bia. A yavama who is not acquired with money can be acquired with bia. Zusha nikras bekesef enudin nikras bia. A woman who is acquired with money can certainly be acquired with bia. So the Gemara says, no, not so fast, because I'm ivriya tochech sheniknas bekesef niknas bia, because there's something called an ama ivriya, the minor servant girl, she's acquired with kesef and not bia. So then the Gemara rejects that question. But an ama ivriya was not originally sold as a wife; she was sold as a servant. Later, the yud can become a wife. So you can't ask a question from ama, because that's not an initial relationship or acquisition for matrimony to be a wife, compared to Yavama, that a Yavama, the whole kinyan is for Ishus, yet Kesef doesn't work. So Tamalamar Ubala. So therefore we have a Josh Ubala. So the Gemara says, well, Amali Kraha Asila, but we don't need a pasuk. We learned a limud with the Mematzinu. The Kavachomer didn't work, but a Mematzinu from Yibum and Ama. Excuse me. Ravashi Mishum Tikal Memer Meikar Dedina Pircha Mehecha Kamaisi Sami Avama. Ravashi says the original limud was already defective because there was a big question against it. Where do we learn from Yavama? Mali Yavama Shekain Zukukov Omedes from Razushain Zukukov Omedes. Yavama has a connection with the brother-in-law. Part of the Kiddushin from her late husband, that still is in effect, and that made a connection, a bond between her and her brothers-in-law. So because there is some connection, B is enough to solidify that, to finalize that. But regular to a man and a woman, there is no connection at all, so Bia may not be enough. Bia might only be enough when there's already a partial connection. But for regular man and woman, there is no partial connection yet, so Bia wouldn't be enough to make them married. So therefore, we need a drush of Ubala, and I believe that there's a Rashi in Yevamos on Daf Samaches Amid Beis, Tibir Maskal Eved, who brings a Shiltos, who does have a limud for Bia from Shtar and Kesef. So sometimes the Shiltos has limuds that our Gemara doesn't have, and I think this would be a case like that.